folks, HR Funk here. I hope you're all having a happy holiday season here at the end of 2020, and I'm happy to be bringing you one of my favorite videos of the year, and I've been doing this same video for the last several years in a row, and this is where I discuss my favorite new firearms acquisition of the past 12 months. And every year that I do this, I have a certain number of firearms that have come into my collection. This year I have 6 different firearms that have joined my collection since the beginning of 2020. And I'm going to go over each one of them individually. Now, each one of these firearms already has its own review video. So I'm going to be talking about them just quickly as I review them as candidates for my favorite firearm of the year. But if you want to know in-depth information about each one of these firearms, go back and look at the past review video and you'll find a lot more of what I had to say about each one. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the candidates for my favorite firearm of 2020. 2020 turned out to be, among other things, the year of the handgun for me, and of the 6 firearms that came into my collection during the past 12 months, 5 out of the 6 are handguns, and of course I have one long gun here on the table, and I'm going to be introducing these more or less in the order that I acquired them. First up was my 5904 Smith & Wesson 9mm pistol. This was my first firearms acquisition of the year. I purchased it back in, I believe, January of this year. And if you watched the review video on this, you already know that this is a firearm that I have some personal history with, going all the way back to my earliest days as a civilian law enforcement officer. And it's one that I'm very glad to have back in my collection. And this is one that, when I first acquired it, it really came about as kind of a surprise, and I sort of stumbled across it, more or less. And one thing I don't think I've ever mentioned about this particular pistol that's kind of unique is the product code for this pistol identifies it as one that was part of a contract for the Royal Hong Kong Police back in the early 1990s. Now, there are no import marks on it to show that it actually went to Hong Kong and then came back into the United States, so I suspect it was an overrun that was just sold on the commercial market by Smith & Wesson. But that's kind of neat that it was part of that contract for the Royal Hong Kong Police way back then. And again, it's one that I'm very glad to have back in my collection. Now, I suspect that acquisition of the 5904 was working on my mind and my memory, because the next firearm that I acquired during the year was also a 3rd generation Smith & Wesson 5900 series pistol, but this is the double action only 5943, also chambered for the 9mm cartridge. This pistol has a shortened 6900 series slide and barrel, mated to the full-size 5900 series frame. And this is one that historically I carried for much longer. Not this specific pistol, but one identical to it. This was also part of a relatively small number of pistols that were made with the blued slide over the anodized silver alloy frame. And again, this is one that I'm glad to have back in my collection. I did not have it for many, many years. In fact, the last pistol that I carried, identical to this, was one that belonged to my department. When that department traded those pistols, I was not able to buy the one that I had carried. And for all of the years, which was on the order of 20 years from the time the department traded these pistols until I was able to purchase this one, I saw exactly one other 5943 that was configured like this one is, and that one was in very rough shape, so I ended up not purchasing that one. But I am glad to have this one again. If any of you are familiar with ERJG from the live streams and from the chats on Saturday morning, he helped me with this. He actually found this on one of the online sites and pointed me in the direction of it, and I was able to make the purchase. So I was very glad to purchase this, and as I said, I'm happy to have it back in my collection. The next firearm to join my collection is one that I was interested in from the first time I heard of it, and the more I learned about it, the more interested I became, and I was very happy to finally add the Springfield Armory Hellcat to my collection. This is one that, particularly as the weather has gotten cooler, I have carried more and more. I recently recorded the video with the new DeSantis crisscross holster. I've been carrying this pistol a lot in that holster. And this is just a very nice, very practical little pistol for concealed carry. Dimensionally, it is very small. About the only other pistol that comes close to it on the market is the Sig P365. And for myself, I've handled the 365, I've handled the Hellcat, and I just like the way the Hellcat shoots better and the way it feels better. And I also really like the sights that the Hellcat has. Now, the rear sight, or maybe I should say the sights in general, are sort of a love 'em or hate 'em proposition. And for me, I fall down on the love 'em because I come up, I've got that big dot in front with the wide U-shaped rear sight notch, and they line up very quickly for me. They allow me to place very quick shots on target. I like the trigger on the Hellcat, and again, this is one that I purchased, and if you've watched my videos for a number of years, you know sometimes I've acquired firearms that just don't perform very well. Some of those I've ended up having lots of problems with. Some of them have left my collection as a result. And this is one that lived up to my expectations right out of the box, and it continues to. I very much like my Springfield Armory Hellcat, and again, I'm glad to have it in my collection. Finally, around the middle of 2020, I acquired my first and only long gun of the year. This is my Ruger American Hunter rifle, chambered for the .308 Winchester cartridge. And I actually acquired this rifle more or less as a test bed for the series that I produced on the Leatherwood M1000 Pro rifle scope. And as I was evaluating potential rifles that I could use for that project, I came across the Ruger American, and this is another one of those firearms that the more I learned about it, the more that I liked it. Historically, I've not been a fan of Ruger rifles, particularly their bolt action series, but this is one that I thought deserved a closer look, and this is also another firearm that very much did live up to my expectations. It is very accurate, it's light and relatively compact, as you can see with the 20-inch barrel. It comes with the factory compensator to help, and not that the .308 Winchester generates a great deal of recoil, but that does help soften it some, and it helps to stabilize the scope during the shot to help you see the shot impacts at greater distances. In terms of an evaluation bed for the M1000 Pro, it did very well, and I'm a fan of both this rifle and the optic on top of it, and this is one that's a lot of fun to shoot. I shot this in one of our last matches of the year where we were allowed to essentially shoot whatever rifle we wanted to, and I took this rifle with this optic on top and I shot it in that match, and it performed very, very well. Now, I was only shooting at distances out to 300 yards, but still it performed very well. I've been very happy with this rifle, and this is going to be another candidate for my favorite firearm of 2020. My next firearms acquisition for the year was one that I really never expected to purchase. In fact, I went searching for another firearm as a test bed for a future project, and as I was looking through the particular store that I went to, I came across the Iwi Masada, and when I first saw it in the case, I noticed it, I thought, there's a Masada. I'd heard a little bit about the Masada, but I really didn't think I was interested in it, and I went on looking at the other options in the case and didn't find anything that I really wanted that day. And when I left the store, I started to think more and more about the Masada, and I started to research it a little bit more. And this is another one of these firearms that the more I learned about it, the more interested I became. And eventually I went back to the same store several days later, and fortunately they still had the Masada in the case. So I ended up purchasing the Masada, and again, the more I work with this firearm, the more I like it. It has a lot of interesting features right out of the box, and again, go back and see my full review on the Masada to hear all about it. But one of the things that particularly interests me is the fact that it's optics ready right from the factory. So for a relatively inexpensive price, you get an optics ready platform that's a very solid firearm, and I'm looking forward to that future project, being able to report more on the Masada and tell you more about its performance along with the project that I'm going to be producing. So the next candidate for my favorite firearm of 2020 is the Iwi Masada. My final firearms acquisition for 2020 is one that I had been contemplating for a while, and that is a compact CZ75 variant. And for a long time I was looking for a CZ PCR. I really thought that I was interested in one of those, and in the last year, or probably a little bit longer than a year, I've seen exactly one of those in a local firearms store, and at that particular time I didn't have the extra spare funds in order to be able to bring that one home with me. Since that time, I've continued to look for a PCR, and I've just never come across another one. Now I realize I could look online, and I really just with the other things that I've been doing, didn't want to take the time to do that. I was hoping to find one here locally that I could pick up. And recently, as in about 3 weeks ago, I was in a local store and they did not have a PCR, but they did have the Green Cz P01. And I'd seen the P01 a few times, and this one, being OD in color, caught my eye, I'm sure largely due to the color. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought, you know, I'm going to give the P01 a try and maybe save that PCR for a future test. And since I acquired the P01, I've really fallen in love with this little pistol. You may have seen the recent review video that I produced. Also, I used this in a qualification video, and this is another one of these little firearms that the more I work with it, the more I shoot it, the more I like it. And it's an extremely good performing little pistol. It's more accurate really than it has any right to be. It fits my hand wonderfully, it points very well, and this is just an extremely good little pistol if you're looking for a DA/SA style semi-auto with a metal frame, obviously not a polymer frame. This is one you really might want to take a look at, especially if you want to be able to add a light or laser to the front, because it's already set up with the rail for that. So my final firearm, or my final candidate I should say, for my favorite firearm of 2020 is the CZ P01. So those are the candidates for my favorite firearm of 2020. Now I'm going to start through the very painful process of eliminating them one by one until only one is left on the table, and that last firearm on the table will be my pick for my favorite one of the past 12 months. And my criteria for selecting firearms is not entirely objective. Sometimes I'm looking at just which one I like the best, or which one historically I've liked the most, or other times it might be which ones I'm getting the most use from, or which ones I feel are just the best acquisition or addition to my collection. So as I'm going through this, I'll walk you through my thought process for why I'm eliminating a particular firearm or why I'm keeping a particular firearm, and you can see if you agree or disagree, but in the end I will select one of these as my favorite firearm for 2020. While I realize it seems pretty seamless on your end, the pause between that last segment and this one lasted about 15 minutes while I tried to figure out which one of these firearms I'm going to eliminate from contention first as my favorite one for 2020. And as I've mulled this over, this might be the most difficult group that I've had yet since I've been producing this type of video. All of these firearms I very much like. I like a lot of them for different reasons, but I'm glad to have each and every one. They're going to be permanent fixtures in my collection. And trying to select one of them and say, this is the one that I'm taking out of contention first, is a pretty difficult thing to do. But after going back and forth in my mind several times, I finally decided that the first one that I'm going to eliminate from this group of 6 is going to be my Springfield Armory Hellcat. I really like the Hellcat. It is a tremendous little pistol for all the reasons that I mentioned a little while ago. But the reason that I'm eliminating it is it's a little bit more utilitarian. I purchased it as an off-duty and backup firearm, not necessarily as something I'm going to be going out and doing a lot of pleasure shooting with. And for that reason, I don't tend to think of it quite the same as I do the other firearms back behind me, each of which were acquired for other reasons. So because of that, and that granted is a very slim criteria for eliminating the Hellcat, but I have to use something, and I'm going to be eliminating my Springfield Armory Hellcat first from this group as my favorite firearm of 2020. Now, if you've not seen one of these videos in the past, I'll tell you now that each time I eliminate one of these firearms from contention as my favorite for this year, the ability to do so the next time becomes progressively harder. As I said a few minutes ago, I like all of these firearms. I like some of them for different reasons, and trying to take one of them out of the selection or try to come up with one ultimately that is the favorite is a little bit like trying to pick your favorite child. Of the ones that I have left, the 5 firearms that I have left on the table, the next one that I'm going to eliminate from contention is going to be, this hurts, my Smith & Wesson Model 5904. The 5904 is a fantastic pistol. It's a great example of the final evolution of Smith & Wesson's metal frame semi-automatic pistols. I carry the 5904 a lot, and this pistol has great value to me for a multi-purpose handgun. I use it carrying it afield. I carry it sometimes off duty. Every once in a while, when the mood strikes me, I carry it on duty. And it does everything as well today as when it left the factory back in 1991. This is a great pistol, but I'm eliminating it mainly because the other ones still on the table have things about them that I like a little bit more as firearms. Now, I have more personal history with this particular pistol than I have with some of the ones that are left, but I also have certain things about the ones that are still on the table that I tend to prefer, and I've got to eliminate one, so the next one that I'm going to eliminate is going to be my 5904. So the time between these video segments gets longer and longer each time. I know you can't tell on your end, but each time I pause the video, I'm evaluating everything left on the table in terms of usefulness to me personally, versatility, accuracy, weight, the fun factor, everything you can imagine as I try to decide which one to eliminate next. And as I said a moment ago, it's harder and harder each time I eliminate another candidate. And the next one that I'm going to eliminate, and I hate to do this at this stage because it's my only long gun of the year, and that's my Ruger American Hunter rifle. The only reason I'm eliminating this is because for me personally, this is more of a range gun and long-range rifle, and particularly as a Marine, a rifleman first, I really hate to take this one out of the mix. This is an extremely accurate rifle. It is compact. It's relatively lightweight as long-range rifle setups go. I enjoy shooting it a lot. I especially like it when coupled with this Leatherwood M1000 Pro rifle scope, but I don't get to use it as often as I do the others that are still on the table here. I tend to carry these more, shoot them more, and use them more, although I have shot the American Hunter quite a bit. But I am going to eliminate this one next, and again, each time I eliminate something, I feel like I have to say that it's not that I dislike this particular firearm or any of the other ones that I've already taken off the table. It's just the ones that are still left have qualities about them that I personally value a little bit more. So once again, the Ruger American Hunter is the next one to leave contention for my favorite firearm of 2020. So just to recap, the three firearms that I still have in contention are my Smith & Wesson 5943, double action only 9mm, my Iwi Masada 9mm semi-auto pistol, and my Cz P01. Interesting that all of the firearms left in contention are 9mm semi-auto pistols. So let's go on and see which one is the next one to be eliminated from the group. So of the remaining three, the next one that's going to leave the group, or maybe I should say leave the table, is going to be my Iwi Masada. And the reason this one's leaving at this point is because, again, this is a little bit more of a utilitarian pistol. Now, once again, I keep feeling that I have to say I very much like the Masada. It performs extremely well. It's a great pistol in all respects, but it's also the typical present generation polymer frame striker fired semi-auto, which has become pretty much ubiquitous in today's firearms market. And the ones that are still on the table have some other characteristics that I tend to like a little bit more. So for that reason, I'm eliminating the Masada, even though as far as a holster carry duty firearm, this might be the best one out of the group that I've had on the table today. And so it comes down to two finalists, my Cz P01 and my Smith & Wesson Model 5943. And again, I've gone back and forth thinking about this, evaluating each one on its own merits. And the more practical of the two, particularly in today's society, is the Cz. obviously with the ability to add lights and lasers and such, and the updated design, it really is probably the one that is the more versatile, again, for use in modern times. The 5943 is the one that I have the stronger emotional attachment to. It's the one that I carried for 10 years back during the 1990s. It's one that I relied on. It's an extremely good pistol. It never let me down. And going back and forth between these two, either one could be the top pick. But the one that I'm going to eliminate, my final elimination from the table, is going to be the CZ P01. Again, this is a great pistol. It is extremely well made. It shoots very well. There is nothing bad I can say about this pistol. As I said earlier, the more I work with this pistol, the more I like it. But I am going to be eliminating this one as the last contender for my favorite firearm of 2020. And that leaves the 5943 as my favorite firearm for 2020. I should say the 5943 SSV, SSV standing for short slide variation. As I said, this is the 6900 series slide and barrel mated to the 5900 series frame. And there are a few things about this pistol that caused me to give it the nod over the CZ P01. First off is my extreme familiarity with this design. As I said, I carried this pistol for a period of 10 years back during the 1990s, and during that time I found it to be an extremely dependable pistol. It never let me down. This is the pistol that I took with me when I went to my first firearms instructor school, and I was out shooting people there with all types of different pistols with my 5943 SSV. And also, I'm a trained armorer for this pistol, so along with carrying and shooting one, I maintained these pistols for our department for that same period of 10 years, and I am extremely comfortable with this design. I found it to be very robust and, again, very reliable. The last thing that was really the icing on the cake that pushed the 5943 SSV over the top is the trigger pull. And I've mentioned this before, with the double action only third generation pistols, Smith & Wesson redesigned their lock work, and if you compare this to a standard third generation pistol, you will see the trigger in the double action only is farther back in the trigger guard. So in essence, they gave the double action only pistols a shorter trigger pull for the double action only, and it resulted in an extremely smooth and very good quality double action trigger. And that consistent trigger pull is something I've noticed with these pistols ever since I've carried them. Again, they're very compact. They have a 15-shot capacity, so they retain the entire or the full capacity of the standard 5900 series, yet it's all packaged in a very compact firearm that I would have to put it side by side with the Glock 19, but this is at least as compact as the Glock 19, and this one might even be a little bit smaller. So again, the 5943 SSV is my favorite firearm for 2020. And that's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about my pick for 2020, or if you have some of your own, definitely let me know in the comments section. As always, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. See you next time, folks. And until then, Happy New Year and good shooting. Bye-bye.